Hi, it's Chris. Today I'm going to show you how to install a new transmission in your Whirlpool built washer. Fairly easy transmission to replace, and I'll take you through it step by step. In today's repair, you're going to want to remove the power supply from the washer, as you're going to be working with some electrical components. To do so, you're just going to remove the plug from the wall, and as well turn off your water supply and remove your hoses. You may also want to take your drain hose and pull it out of your standpipe, because we're going to be moving the machine around and laying it down for some of the repair. So to change the part, first thing I'm going to do is just put a drop cloth on the washer and my little magnetic cup to hold some screws. I'm just going to turn it around so you can see what I need to do to release the top. There's just 2 1/4-inch screws, one here and one here. I'm just going to remove those screws. And this will allow us to raise the top and get it up out of the way so that we can begin to take apart the inner basket assembly. With those 2 screws removed, the next thing we want to do is just remove this little conduit plate. And again, 1/4-inch nut driver, we'll remove that 1 screw. Remove that plate and set it to one side. Now with that out of the way, we can just turn our washer and we'll raise the top. Just raise the top and set the top down over these little tabs. Just like that. That'll keep the top from falling off the back of the washer. And now we'll just lean the top against the wall. And we can begin to tear down here. If you're working on your machine and you don't have a wall behind you, you can take a bungee cord or a piece of string and just run it from the corner of the top and just tie it off somewhere in one of these holes so that it'll stop it from falling right back over for you. So the first thing we're going to do is remove our agitator. So there's an agitator cap right here that we're just going to pull out of the way. So now we're going to remove that agitator cap. Just give it a wiggle and it pulls right up out of the way. We'll set it to one side. So now with that agitator cap out of the way, we're just going to loosen and remove this bolt that holds the agitator in place. The agitator will pull and it should slide up and off like that. Sometimes they've been on there for a long time. You may have to apply a bit more effort than that, but it will just come right off. So the next step is to remove this locking nut that holds the tub in place. It's a regular right-hand thread. So the manufacturer makes a special wrench for removing this nut. You can see it's got tabs that lock into the nut. Also, if you don't have this, there's a couple ways that you may be able to get that nut off. So you can either purchase it, or if you can borrow it from someone that you know has it, or I'll show you another way. So that just drops onto the nut. You're going to take your hammer, and you're going to make a whole lot of noise when you bang on this. And you just give it a few good whacks, trying not to bang the porcelain tub and chipping it. So you're going to give it a couple good smacks, and then just unthread it. Now they're not all this easy. Sometimes if this has not been touched for several years, there's always a bunch of soap and build up around it, and they'll be on there pretty tight, and you may have to really pound at it a few times. You can put a little WD-40 or some other penetrating lubricant to help release that. It's just, you never know. Sometimes they come real easy, sometimes you really got to pound on them. If you don't have the tool, you can take a chisel or a steel bar, something you can get into one of those slots and pound on that tool from the side and apply the pressure to bump it free. It's a little harder to do without the wrench, but it certainly can be done. So with the nut loose, we'll thread it right off. And set that nut to one side. The next thing we're going to do is we need to remove this entire tub cover. So to remove that tub ring, we just need a small blade screwdriver, and we're just going to insert them into these tabs, apply a little pressure, and it'll release. Go to your next one, do the same thing. And you'll just do that all the way around to free them. So the last one released. Lift your tub ring up out of place and set it to one side. So with the tub ring removed, and we've already removed the lock nut, it's time to remove the inner basket. These as well can sometimes be a little difficult to get out. You may need to just apply a little bit of pressure on one side, rotate it and press down again until you start to get a little bit of movement in the tub, so you can kind of wiggle it. And once you've got it so that you can see that it's wiggling, you start to lift upwards. And up she comes. So now with your tub out of the way, we just need to remove this drive collar. Just typically we'll take a small hammer, give it a tap. You can do it with a wrench. Just give it a tap so it's loose and it'll slide off. This one, as you can tell, has been apart before. But in your case, if it's not been apart, you may have to give it a few good whacks, but it'll just pop right off. And you just put that aside as well. So now we're just going to lower our top back down onto the machine. Now if the top's back down, we just want to lay the machine down on its back. We're going to need to remove the transmission. There's a couple pieces we're going to take off to make that more accessible. So we're going to remove that belt cover by loosening those screws. Set them to one side so we don't lose them. Set our belt cover to one side. And now we just need to remove some electrical harnesses. We have one here for the motor. Just give the locking tab a little squeeze with our finger. And that harness is removed. We now want to remove the harness for the capacitor. Just by giving that locking tab a little squeeze. And wiggle the harness off. We also have a harness going here to our actuator. We squeeze that connector and wiggle it off, and we're clear. So we just need to remove these two connections where the harnesses are secured to the transmission just by gripping them and wiggling them while applying some outward pressure. And we'll work them till they come off. That's one. And we have another one here. The same process. And now our electrical is free and clear. Just tuck that out of the way. And we just have to now remove 4 bolts. One here. One here. One here. And the last one's there. I'm just using a nut driver to remove those bolts. You can use a socket, ratchet wrench, whatever you have available to you. We'll just set the screws into the bottom. Okay, so with those screws removed, we're now able to wiggle our transmission out of the washer. So our next step is to remove a bunch of the components that's external from the transmission from our old one to our new one. I'm going to remove the belt from the motor and pulley, and very easy, we're just going to rotate the assembly, applying some pressure on the belt so it comes towards you. So with our belt removed, we're going to remove our actuator, which is held with 2 screws. And the actuator just lifts right off. And we'll set that to one side. So now we're going to remove the capacitor. So we just apply a little bit of pressure from the back out towards you, and then rotate it counterclockwise, and it pops right out. Next thing we want to do is remove our motor, and there's just 2 bolts. With the 2 bolts removed, we just can take our motor right out, and we'll actually move it right over and install it on the new transmission. The nice thing with this is there's no adjustment for the motor. The 2 bolts automatically line it up right where it needs to be. We'll just tighten those bolts up, and your motor is installed. The next thing we need to do is to remove the pulley from the transmission shaft. Now everything wants to try and move when you try to loosen that off. It may find a little hard to hold and loosen at the same time. You can take your belt and wrap it around the pulley, and it'll give you a little something to hang on to while you loosen it. Now the nut comes off, the pulley simply slides off, and now we have to remove your splutch. That's the term the manufacturer calls it, but it's also a clutch. This plastic outer housing comes off just by squeezing in these tabs. With those 4 tabs released, we'll slide this mechanism off. We have a spring that we need to transfer over to our new transmission. And we'll put our splutch back into place. Now you notice on your new transmission there's a little bit of a difference. Your old one, the splutch just locked into these tabs. On the new one, they've given you slots to put those tabs into. So we move our splutch into place, push the tabs into the larger hole, of course, and then just rotate it. And it will lock into the narrow parts of the transmission. Just that easy. Now we'll install our pulley. And now the nut goes back on. Now you'll notice there's no lock washer. There's a little serrated edge that keeps the nut tight, but it's also a good idea to put a little drop of Loctite on that nut so that it doesn't vibrate loose. So I'll just go get the Loctite and we'll put a little drop on it. So you just take your Loctite, apply a little drop on here, Now there's a couple different versions of Loctite out there by different color. There's blue Loctite and red Loctite. You would only ever want to use blue Loctite on this type of nut. The idea of the blue Loctite is it allows it to hold the nut securely and vibration won't loosen it up. Red Loctite is for a permanent situation where you may never ever want to have to take that nut off again. So just a little 1 drop of blue Loctite onto the nut and just thread it onto that pulley. And we'll just take our belt again, just so I can hold that pulley tight while I tighten it. And that's done. We can install our belt now. Just going to put it on the motor pulley, onto the flat shaft, or the flat surface of this pulley, and just rotate it. And your belt will pop on, and you'll just want to rotate it a few times just so it lines itself up. We'll install our capacitor next, and it's just a matter of taking our T-shape and put it into the square hole. And if you remember, we had to go in a counterclockwise to remove it. We're just going to rotate it clockwise and it'll snap into place, just like that. Next, we'll install our actuator. So you'll just want to make sure you get this post into that slot. And we'll just secure the 2 holding screws. Now we'll just install our belt cover. Install the 2 screws. Tighten them up. So before we put the transmission up into place, just going to put a little bit of lubrication on that seal. Now we'll just introduce the transmission back into the washer. Put our 4 screws back in. I'll just tighten those 4 screws. These screws are going into a plastic tub, which have already had threads cut in from the screws originally. So you don't want to tear out that plastic any more than what the original screws did. So you put your screw in, and when you go to tighten it, you just move it backwards a little bit. You'll feel it drop into the threads that were originally cut, and then tighten it up. So just bring that first one up close without tightening it, in case that transmission needs to be moved a little bit or jiggled in order to get the others to line up straight. Same process, back it off until you feel it drop into the threads, and then tighten it and just go back and tighten that one we just snug. Little touch on the others. Your transmission is installed. Now we just need to connect the wiring harnesses to the various components. Hook up our capacitor wires. The wiring harness for our actuator. The wiring harness for the motor. Now the last step is to take those push pins and just push them into the hole in the transmission, and that just holds your wiring harness up out of the way. Same with the one up here by your actuator. And your transmission is installed. You just need now to put the machine back up on its feet and install the tubs. So now with the washer back up on its feet, we're just going to raise our top again, set it onto those locator tabs, lean it back against the wall. So the first piece we want to put back in is our drive lug. You'll notice on the collar there's a slot on either side. So on your transmission, there's a lug on this side and on this side. Now it may be in a different spot depending on where the transmission was when it came out of the box. It doesn't matter. The main things you want to do is slide your collar on so that those tabs go into those slots. Just slide your collar down, line those up, and push it down into place. You may want to take your hammer and just give it a little tap just to lock them in. Now you're ready to install your inner basket. Now if you heard a bit of gurgling going on there, that wasn't from my stomach. That gurgling is from a balance ring that's in the tub that helps deal with an unbalanced load. So that's perfectly normal to hear that water slurshing. Put our lock nut back in place. Regular right hand thread. Slide it down onto the collar. Take your hammer, and again without beating the porcelain off your tub. And you're good. We can now drop our agitator into place. We're going to reinstall the agitator bolt. Put your agitator cap back on, just with a push. And now we just need to put our tub cover back on. So where your bleach dispenser is where you'll want this part of your tub ring to line up. So that's in your front left-hand corner. So now we can just set our tub ring into place. And just push it down and lock in those tabs all the way around. So now with everything back together for your tub, we're just going to lower our top. Fit it into place, slide it back. With the top back in place, we'll put in those 2 screws in the back, bring in our screws in our back panel. The first screws we're going to put in are the ones that we're actually holding the top. And I'm just going to show those to you because they're a little different than the other screws that are on the machine. If you can see those, you'll see there's a difference in the thread. The ones that held the top are the smaller ones with the fine thread. So those are the first 2 we're going to put back in because they hold our top into place. Take our nut driver. So now we just have to put our back panel on. So we bring our back panel up, slip it over our valves. Put a screw into place, and I won't tighten it up yet until I get all the other screws in, so there's a little flexibility in the panel. And just work your way around one at a time. Now that they're all in, just snug them up. The last piece we need to put on is that access panel for the wiring harness. Those little tabs just go into those slots. And put the screw in. Now with that last piece installed, it's just a matter of hooking up your hoses and your power cord, and your repair is complete.